special guests that we are grateful were able to put a little time in their schedule on a very last minute.
Thank you, and thank you for asking us to come tonight, or asking the officers to come tonight, actually. This is Deputy Chief Bodker. He is the supervisor for the Southside community.
Yep, south of Fifth, everything south of Fifth Avenue.
And then Commander Smith Weir, his face may be familiar to a lot of you. He actually worked this precinct a few years back, and then he also showed up when we introduced the community to Chief Bryant, and that was, he was on the agenda that evening. So these guys can answer about any of your questions. We don't want to steal the thunder from our production that we're going to do on November 2nd, where all the officers from the 11th precinct and the 13th precinct will be here to address all the community crime questions. But because of the recent events, we know that it was really important for you to be able to ask the officers some pressing questions that you've got right now. And I'll leave it to you.
Yep. And if I can just throw out, this doesn't need to be a special event. I'll leave my contact info with Dee. My cell phone number's on there, my email's on there. Unfortunately, my cell phone's on 24 hours a day, and I answer calls 24 hours a day. So we are both happy, we work for all of you. And so we are both happy to, if you just have a question about what's going on, if we can share that, we're more than happy to. If you want us to appear somewhere and talk to people in person, we're happy to do that as well, or virtually, if people feel more comfortable doing that. As I said, we work for you. Commander Weir, on a little smaller scale than me, but we're both here for you. And if you have questions, we can get answers for you.
So obviously, just to piggyback that, I feel the same way. My cell phone's on all the time. I'm always available by email and text, and we feel this. We're responsive to you. In regards to some of the events of the past couple weeks, specifically, we had the shooting, and then we've had a couple carjackings. So I'll handle those separately because they are not related. We had 2 carjackings back to back, 2 nights in a row. The suspects were male juveniles. The first night, I think a phone or some kind of thing tracked back up to the Easton area. Because of that, when they happened in the exact same area around the exact same time the very next night, our officers that work 7th precinct, work King Lincoln, which extends over into the Gateway area, closer to the airport, went over to Stelzer Road and waited. And of course, the suspect vehicle the stolen car ended up showing up, ended up being in the car chase and a pursuit with a crash over in Gahanna. Those suspects were taken into custody. We did recover a BB gun from the car that was used in the robbery that happened over in German Village. So that is a separate issue from the subsequent shooting that happened a couple nights later.
Can I chime in real quick?
Yep.
So those young men ranged in age from 12 to 16, and all had multiple other robbery charges and arrests in this calendar year. So that's a concern for us as law enforcement officers when we're seeing multiple young people commit violent crimes. 2 nights ago, this is astonishing to me, and probably the most astonishing I've seen. We had a carjacking on the west side, which involved a 7, a 10, and a 15-year-old. I certainly thought when I first read about it that the 7 and 10-year-olds were passengers in the vehicle, but they were not. They were active participants in the robbery. It's just hard for me to wrap my mind around that. But that is the facts of cases throughout the city of Columbus. We're seeing that. I often say, and you'll hear both people within our organization, outside our organization say, hey, this is happening throughout the country. Frankly, I'm not sure that I care that it's happening throughout the country. We live in Columbus, and if I don't feel safe walking outside of my door, that's what's important to me. So I can assure you that the officers on this zone are committed to your safety, and they're working hard to make a downward trend in crime and violent crime. Sorry.
No, that was great. And then going over to the shooting, we have to be a little bit more careful about how we describe the shooting because that case will eventually be presented to the grand jury. and all of you, all of us, are prospective members of the grand jury as residents of Franklin County. So I can't quote unquote taint the jury pool in terms of that, but we can tell you that, one of the individuals that was shot approached the other individual and shot that person in the leg. The other individual had a CCW permit and returned fire. And we don't believe it was related to a current trend of anything else. It was not related to any of those carjackings that we discussed. So that is kind of where we're at. We are in constant communication with our homicide bureau about that and other cases, making sure that it's not related. But like in terms of the actual details and what's gonna get presented to the grand jury, we have to kind of respect the process with that. As frustrating as that is, I'd like to sit here and speculate and conjecture and all that, but we do have to be careful about that, and our detectives have asked us to kind of, we can talk about what's been in the press release, but really the prosecutors aren't big fans of us going around, and especially when they know that stuff is gonna go to the grand jury. I can tell you though that the individual that survived has not been charged by us, and that once that packet is complete, we will forward that over to the county prosecutor's office, who will review it and decide whether to take it to the grand jury or not. And then at some point, we'll be able to kind of tell the rest of the story as opposed to, kind of the limited information we're given right now. So that is that. Now, the other thing we had done here recently, we have, every zone has a crime analyst that goes over crime stats and works very closely with us in terms of letting us know about different trends that we're seeing, where we're up, where we're down in terms of crimes and criminal offenses. So I had her pull German Village crime stats for the third quarter of the past 4 years, 2018 through 2021. And obviously, it's not static, right? We don't have controls, and it's hard to kind of judge 1 year to the next. In 2018, we had 94 offense reports taken in the third quarter in German Village. 2019, it was 84. 2020, it was 119. And then 2021, it was 85. There is one glaring area that we are up in 2021, and that is robberies of individuals. And there were 6 in the third quarter. So in those 3 months, there were 6 instances of individuals being robbed in German Village during those 3 months. In the previous years, there had been anywhere from 1 to 3 of those. So it's not a great number, gross number wise, but in terms of percentages, it's a significant percentage. So that is something we're looking at. Now, a couple of those incidents were those carjackings we just talked about. That have been, we did solve those, but we are working with our detectives to kind of analyze that and say, are there any other patterns that we can identify here? Something that will lead us in the right direction to prevent any future instances where we could identify a suspect and maybe arrest them before they commit another crime. So that's kind of what we're looking at with that. In terms of the greater number of offenses, burglary of motor vehicle, or thefts from motor vehicles, theft offenses, vandalism, motor vehicle thefts, many of those are down, and that's where the numbers are, what's driving the numbers down overall. We do recognize that typically fourth quarter, October, November, December in German Village is where the theft offenses rise with the packages. So, and we talked about this at the meeting a couple months ago. We will deploy our normal kind of what we call directed patrol in the November and December in German Village, which is basically we have officers that we put in plain clothes that watch the FedEx trucks and UPS trucks, and then we watch who's watching them, all right? Because that's typically what goes on is we have suspects that watch the UPS and the FedEx and I'm dating myself now, and Amazon Prime trucks drive from house to house, and then after the truck delivery drivers leave, they try to go up on the porch and they take them. And then hopefully our detectives or our officers see where they're going, and then they arrest them. So that is the plan. Like I said, we've done that every year for the past several years, and it's been, we've always had success with it. We've always arrested suspects. It's always led us to other thefts, suspects in houses that are kind of basically being used to fence stolen goods. So we will be doing that again. as for that, that is kind of the crime report for German Village for third quarter. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
There was a shootout in front of my house on the 23rd at 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Frankfurt and City Park, 15 rapid shot. Has any progress been made on what happened that day?
I have not been advised of that. You said it happened on the 23rd,
Yes.
and nobody got hit, I take it, or else I
No,
would've heard
there was
about
some
it.
property damage with some of the vehicles, but it was a little alarming to have rapid fire gunshots on your front porch, you know, outside your front porch at 10 a.m.
So unfortunately, the one thing that no one in this room wants to hear is that that is very common this year in Columbus. On the back end, that a lot of people don't know what we do when that happens. Obviously, if someone walks into a hospital or someone gets shot, that changes the complexion of that
Sure.
investigation significantly. In that case, on this zone, we're fortunate enough to have officers that are dedicated to shot spotter and shell casings.
Mhm.
We employ some technology called NIBIN. And so, as someone who was over the crime lab for a few years, NIBIN is almost as good as DNA. And so what that does is the shell casings that were collected will go to our crime lab, and the scientists will compare those shell casings to other shootings, other homicides, other robberies where shots have been fired, and they can say, hey, the shooting that occurred here is from the same weapon that occurred here. The drawback to that is guns are passed around so quickly and so available that sometimes it's difficult, once our patrol officers get that gun, to figure out who had it on the 23rd. But we work it backwards. That's how we work
Okay.
it backwards. And it stays cataloged until that gun is recovered and matched, if that helps at all.
Just
So
was-
Frankfurt and City Park, did we find any shell casings, do you know?
Yes, you
And
found them from two separate guns.
And were any of the suspect cars hit? We know.
Unaware. I mean, all I know is what the officer on site, you know, as we walked around my house to see if anything had been hit, and then what the neighbor that actually saw one of the shooters.
You're concerned because there was a shootout in front of your house, of course.
Yes.
Anyone would be.
I mean, my mind was it was random that it was at City Park in Frankfurt, you know. Some kind of altercation brought to that point.
And we are seeing that a lot. We've had a lot of shootings into habitations this year and a lot of shootings between vehicles. There was one advertised yesterday that publicized way north on Polaris. Two cars are shooting it out. And we have that oftentimes. In the city of Columbus this year, felonious assaults, we've had roughly just over 1,200 felonious assaults. And that's a significant increase from the past 3 years. And about 90% of those are with firearms.
In the past, I've noticed, during the summertime, there are mounted police that come down here and policemen on bicycles. I haven't noticed that this year. Is that those programs still being done down here or not?
They've been going down Frankfurt recently.
So, I can't speak for the mounted unit per se. I know we've had a lot of turnover in that unit, and I think they're training up some new officers that have taken that assignment in the past couple months. As far as bicycle officers, I know when Chief Bryant came in and he started the park program over the summer, that Schiller Park was one of the designated parks on this zone that officers were gonna be at every day. So there were a good number of times initially when that park program started in July, I think, that there were bicycle officers around Schiller Park. I know that as the summer moved, transpired, there were different parks that we kind of reallocated resources to. We had Saunders Park over off Atchison and Driving Park where we'd had incidents where we moved some officers over to. Obviously Bicentennial downtown, we had the big shootout at, so we had officers there as well. And it's just like I said, it's where are we allocating and deploying our resources based on the crime stats. So we look at the reports like I just read off, and my job is to kind of move the chess pieces along with DC Bodker's direction on, where are we seeing the crime trends, and then we move resources there. So there were bicycle officers there. There still are, in terms of the 11 precinct officers are around. When we have the bigger events and the bigger projects, like the Summer Safety Initiative or the Summer Safe Streets, that's when we kind of combine bike units, and so you'll see a bigger group of bicycle officers all together at one time. On a typical average day, you'll have 2 bicycle officers riding around, covering a precinct in terms of the bike patrols, and a lot of times their sergeant is the one that is gonna be directing them, unless the lieutenant or I or Chief Bodker has said, hey, we had a shootout at City Park in Frankfurt, we need to, be visible down there and looking for, for that stuff. So, we always try, especially with our bike patrols, we try to maintain visibility in all our areas, because they are such a deterrent and they are so effective.
The other challenge with that is that, as Smith talks about chess pieces and resources, I like to remind people, those are people. And so we have less of those in 2021 than we had in 2020 or 2019. And you may have heard me say this during the last meeting that we had, but our hiring training cycle is roughly a 3-year cycle. So if I say, hey, I need 100 officers in patrol, if I say that today, that's the reality of that, unless we eliminate some units and bureaus, is probably a 3-year cycle.
So, looking at the social media that obviously came out after this shooting, there was, a call for maybe looking at private police security. What's your take on the effectiveness of something like that?
Downtown Sid has kind of done that. So they have unarmed security officers that are patrolling some areas downtown. And I think if you talk to some folks involved with that program, they've seen it successful in some places that they just want someone in uniform visible. Something to keep in mind, the liability obviously goes up, training goes down. And I think that is a decision that you have to make as a board. I am really hesitant. Now, we work well with, we have policies that officers cannot work off-duty with armed security guards. We don't do that. But we do, there are places that will respond to runs where there are armed security guards. And we know that the level of training is from no training to, they might be an officer in a very small township in a very small area of Ohio, and they just come into Columbus to work off duty. I always trust our officers the most. That doesn't help if you call and there's not an officer available. I'll give you, for instance, we had a press conference at noon today on the west side to announce a new substation community policing facility. And the question came up to me from a reporter, hey, why aren't there officers at the substation all the time? And my response is realistic. I do not have an officer to take off of the street and put in a substation for 24 hours, one. And then I followed up with questions and said, there are no cruisers on this substation lot. The way the buildings were constructed 60 years ago, roughly, many of them, is just to be a hub for shift change. You change equipment and you change keys, and then they hit the street. And at noon on the west side today, that not one cruiser was clear. Out of maybe 50 officers and 50 cruisers, they were all tied up on runs, and there were runs holding. So if you're calling and saying, hey, I need someone, you might not care if it's a private security guard or a police officer that shows up. I would prefer to be a police officer, but you may not.
Chris, so just to follow up on your question, don't we already have some CCP patrols in the village? Because just a couple nights ago, they were having a meeting in my driveway. And I welcomed them and told them that I thought they were awesome, but
I have
no
seen
idea.
people around at different times, but I don't know who they are and who they report to.
Okay.
And I know their staffing numbers have significantly decreased in 2021 for a lot of reasons, I think. But they are still active. I think their hours and numbers are a lot lower. We see them a little more active in campus area than in German Village area. They are out.
Yeah, they were super nice and told me they were just having a little, meeting, and then they were going on to Schiller Park.
Dee, do you know by chance?
Well, they're usually in this area 2 or 3 times a week during the evening hours. And what we see them doing a lot is patrolling the park, walking on 3rd Street and Thurman and 4th Street in Marion Village. We share Marion Village and German Village shares about 3 CCP officers. They don't carry guns. They do contact the police when they have issues. They have a special number, I think, that they call into the radio room. One of the gentlemen that you probably talked to is Phil, and he's been doing this for about 18 years. So he's very familiar with this area, and he makes it a point to get to know a lot of the business owners, and they talk to him a lot. So he knows the area. He trains the new people. Their eyes, I look at them more as a quick way to the officers. If an officer is needed, they educate people when they see them, like, don't walk around the park at night, it's not a good idea. And they'll put in environmental tickets to 311 when they see street lights out and stuff like that.
Okay.
Sir, I assume it's not legal to sleep in the park, and yet all summer, there were regular people sleeping in Schiller Park. What do we do as citizens when we see that?
Obviously, you can call it in. We are having an issue right now with a homeless population that is, I don't wanna say exploding, but I mean, the numbers appear to be rising, and there's no really good, accurate way to track that, but everybody that works in that space seems to agree that the numbers are moving up, and the city is taking steps to try to remediate that a little bit in terms of working through the Department of Neighborhoods with breaking up camps or finding shelters for some of the people that you see just on park benches, whether it's, you know, in Schiller Park or around downtown or whatever. But that's a slow process in today's world. It's not the city and the powers that be really don't want us just going up as officers and saying it's moving day, you're gone. You know, I think there's been a big push to, I think the refrain a lot of times is, you know, not make being homeless a criminal offense, for lack of a better term. So we do have steps that our officers take, that, you know, our community liaison officers take when they see homeless people. We obviously, there a lot of times there's substance abuse issues, there's mental health issues. We try to connect them with the right people. That being said, this is a constant battle that, you know, as the commander for the area that also is, you know, has downtown, I'm constantly getting complaints about, you know, homeless and some of the crimes that are associated, you know, or ancillary to that. So at a certain point though, there comes a time where, you know, we've made the good faith effort to connect them to services, and if they're still sleeping in the park after the park is supposedly closed, or the park hours are closed, that's a criminal offense, and now we're gonna go the enforcement route. So, the biggest thing we ask is that we document it. So if you call, you know, we're asking our officers to document any action they take, whether that's we talk to them, we identified them, whatever, we referred them to, you know, this, that, or the other. And then as we progress through the process, you know, we wanna continue to document that so that at that point when we do arrest, you know, them for a criminal offense, whether it's trespassing or whatever, that we do have it well documented that we made the efforts to, you know, to do this, that, and the other, and follow the procedures that, you know, we've been asked to follow.
I will say also, this summer, the officers that were working parks did help relocate some folks from that park and other parks, and they were somewhat frustrated because many times they would go back the next day and it was the same people were back, and they would talk to them, and the people would say, we like it better here than we do where you took us to. Additionally, one huge benefit, there's now someone in the courts, Amy O'Grady, if our officers, and she has begun organically to get more and more calls from patrol officers to say, hey, I ran into this family or this person 5 times this week at this park. I've issued them a summons or I've arrested them, she will get involved and say, long-term, what can we do to help you? That's not an overnight solution by any means, but we have seen some improvement with some of our repeat
Engaging
folks.
social
Yes.
services.
Yeah,
Bringing
and-
them into the.
Yes.
We had a project last year, we worked at Sixth and Spring when there was a larger concentration of homeless around there. That kind of pushed a lot of people over to, Long and High. So we had a project at Long and High. We cleaned that up and then it went to the Greyhound station. And then we closed the Greyhound station down, or we were in the process of closing the Greyhound station, and they're selling Dakota. And then that kind of moved people, into a park that is just kind of east of that around town, and Fifth, I think, is where it's at. So we've really been kind of chasing our tail with the larger concentrations of homeless, in the downtown area. And I know that, talking to 11 precinct officers, we've had issues at Schiller Park and around the outskirts of German Village as well. So it is something that's on our radar, and we are working towards it. I know that big picture wise, I think the county approved the Adam H. bill, in the last election. And then the city dedicated about 10 million or 9 million to building a new shelter. So hopefully we're working towards a better solution than what we've got now, which at this point now we're just in damage control, for the most part.
And I'll tell you, so from a homeless perspective, and nothing that anyone in this room doesn't already know, but so many of those individuals are, there's some sort of mental health concern. And so what we did, like it or hate it, we have MCR officers, mobile crisis response officers, and it's an officer teamed with a licensed social worker. They work together every day, 40 hours a day, or 40 hours a week. Sometimes I'm sure they feel like 40 hours a week, but from the moment they mark in service until the moment they're out of service, and there's 5 of those units, they're busy. So in 2020, they responded to about 4,800 calls for service, 5 people. They ended up, out of all of those calls for service, which normally would be handled by a patrol officer, they took about 8 people to jail. So all of the other people they encountered, they took to either a mental health facility, a hospital, some sort of social services to help get folks help. And so that's very, very impactful, very positive, really a good model. And then we, as you may have read, the division is trying an alternative response model. And so if you call in to 911 or 645-4545, you might get routed to a social worker, depending on what the call is. And that social worker has a script of questions to go through, and that social worker determines, hey, the police need to respond to this, or the police do not need to respond to this. And that, so that has not been going for very long, about 90 days. The numbers are less impressive than I would like to see, but not different than around the country. I was in Dallas last week with 22 chiefs from major cities, and all of the ones that are doing this alternative response model, they are seeing out of a 30-day time period, maybe 70 calls that are being routed to social services. That's less than impressive when you're talking about thousands of calls for service. So we'll see how that goes, but we're trying some other things, and that's hopefully going to have an impact on people sleeping in parks.
You know, if you don't mind me adding to your comment, I am on the Friends of Schiller Park, and it goes back to Tim's question with bicycle patrols, and we have really noticed a wonderful response on the bicycle patrols as it pertains to homelessness in Schiller Park. It's a fine line of criminal activity versus nowhere to go, and we respect the job that the officers are doing, and we're not supposed to talk about the new Crew Stadium, but the new Crew Stadium was basically a giant homeless camp before it was there, and all of those people don't live there anymore. And so, but you're not supposed to say that out loud, but that's just a reality that all of our communities are dealing with right now.
There are some larger concentration of, homeless camps that have been around that area, and there are some down, closer to German Village that I think you'll see daytime traffic where people are coming, out from the Scioto and, from the woods over there, where there's the camps, and they come into German Village and downtown during the day, and then they move back in, and so we work with the Department of Neighborhoods. Our community liaison officers are constantly talking to Emerald, about that stuff, locations, the needs, and then we try when we can to get the city to what they call remediate the camp, which, basically is relocate. And, we get pushback sometimes on that, and it's kind of a give and take, on whether we get to connect everybody to services and get them in the shelters, or whether, people say that, they have a right to kind of, camp over, on those grounds. So it's, again, it's always an evolving process, and we're working with it.
So what can we, obviously, there's still a lot of people that are still a little tense in their immediate neighborhood. What can they do right now to kind of, we don't want, as I think I said to somebody the other day on the media, it's like, we don't want to have people just hold up in their house and not come out. But we still want to have people to be observant, but still enjoy our neighborhood. We have a lot of restaurants and businesses here, who depend on us. So what advice can you give to us moving forward for the foreseeable future about our, just continuing to live in this urban environment?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we don't react, obviously, these are traumatic events. So, and I'm not trying to minimize that in the least. Chief said it earlier, if you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. And I can throw all the numbers at you want and say that, we're a lot better this year than we were last year. But if you don't feel safe when you're walking with your family, down 3rd Street to your favorite restaurant, then none of the numbers matter, right? So, part of it is that, we want you to be safe, so, but be smart about it. So, when you're dealing, in an urban environment, walking alone late at night isn't always something that you wanna do, and if you are, you stay in well-lighted areas, have your keys ready, make sure that nobody's following you, make sure that you can call it in if you think somebody is following you. I think that, lock your doors.
So sorry, I
No,
thought I
no
turned it
worries.
off.
Lock your doors, lock your garage. If you have a detached garage, lock your garages. I think in the past, I know that German Village Society has, especially during the holiday season, allowed people to have their packages delivered here. Is that still a thing?
We have a full service package delivery.
I think that that's an excellent program that probably saves a lot of, it's maybe 5 minutes out of your day to, make it over here to, and it's not inconvenient to just go home and get it, but it saves you the hassle and the stress of worrying about whether your packages are taken. Like I said, be a good neighbor. If you see something suspicious, call it in. I think that a lot of times people see something in their head, they think, that doesn't look right, that doesn't sound right, but they talk themselves out of it because they don't wanna be a bother, because they don't wanna be that neighbor, they don't wanna be that person. We tell our officers all the time, trust your instincts. If you look at it and think, that doesn't look right, it probably isn't. And just, let's check it out, have us come check it out. The realities that Chief Bodker talked about are all true. We are dealing with staffing shortages throughout the city. Don't feel sorry for us. Our job is to get here, and they'll get here as soon as they can. We have to prioritize that. That's the dispatcher's job. Luckily, I don't have the heart for that. But we have a system where they prioritize the runs based on what the caller says. So be honest when you're calling into 911 or to 4545. Be honest about what you're seeing. Don't try to minimize it, because that minimization, while you think you're being polite, might lower that priority, which makes it something that might, instead of being dispatched right away or within 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, might be something they say, okay, well, we don't have to dispatch that for an hour because that's just a report, or that's just a lower priority. don't exaggerate it either, because we can usually tell, you know, or we find out later. But please, like I said, be honest. If you know, think, you know, something's out of whack, just call it in, let the dispatchers know, and our officers will get here as soon as they can.
And I'll go a step further. So safety in German Village is not just a police issue. That is a community issue. We are partners in the safety in German Village. And so everyone that lives and works and visits German Village, those are eyes and ears for the police. And so I often say that the solvability percentage of crimes is a good example of public perception of police. And when we have a low solvability, which we do in a lot of areas right now, that tells me we've got to do a lot to increase the public perception of law enforcement. So it's important. Collaborate with us, and when I said this shouldn't be a special occasion that we come to a meeting or get a phone call or an email from someone in this room, that should happen all the time. Additionally, collaborate with your community liaison. There are a lot of resources within the division and a lot of officers that want to help if they know something that is concerning. So that we're here to help. Some of the programs that officers are doing are very impressive here and on 13th Precinct just south of here. We try to help people. Some of the things that Commander Weir has come up with are incredible. I talked about reroute at our last meeting where we're trying to impact young violent offenders and say, if you don't change your life, you're gonna be a murder victim or a murder suspect. And so we are here to help you change your life. How can we do that? And the overwhelming majority of people we've said that to have said, yeah, can you help me get a job, or can you help me find a house, or can you help me find a job, food, or, but there are those people that say, no, this is my lifestyle and I'm gonna keep robbing people. And so when that happens, it's our job to try to put a case together and get them in front of the judges.
So when I was the CRT sergeant, 2013-ish, we were here for meetings monthly. And I mean, that relationship should be just as strong today. And I don't see, now that I'm back, I don't see why it's not. And I know COVID kind of took, you know, a year where none of us were getting together, none of us were meeting. We do virtual meetings all the time. We'll come here, it's not a big deal. But that dialogue with the officers who work this precinct, who work this zone, is a huge benefit, because it keeps them engaged in the neighborhood, in the community, and it makes them smarter cops. And I personally, I know Chief Bodker will agree with me, I love smart cops. Cops who know what's going on in their neighborhood, that know who's who in the neighborhood, and know when something looks out of whack. Like I said, it makes them better police officers in their areas. So I'm all for that.
We don't have the meeting because we lost Jerry Glick.
We have talked about resurrecting some of the meetings through the Block Watch, doing coffee with the commander at some of the area businesses, some during the day, some during the evening, but where everybody will have an opportunity to chew on his ear for a while, or meet Officer Medley. If you haven't met Officer Medley, he's been down here for years, and he does love to engage with people. He is our CLO, and he's very good about doing that. And Sergeant Sykes, our new CRT sergeant, I probably talk to Sergeant Sykes by email or phone 3 times a week, largely about Schiller and who's the new population in Schiller. So because of COVID, the conversations have been limited, but as numbers start trending down, we'll start getting more engaged publicly. I promise you that.
And as I said at our last meeting, the important people from Columbus Police that work in this area are not us two. It's the officers that work this area. And there were roughly 40, just over 40 that were at the last meeting. And so I would say, if we're gonna have a coffee with anybody, let's make it the officers that are actually on the streets, talking to people, and they know people. We'll happily come as well, but we're nowhere near as informative as all of those officers, so we can make it happen.
But I like coffee, and most of the younger officers drink like Monsters.
So we may have to up our game as
It's like
you're
energy
telling us,
drinks
so.
that-
We understand. Does anybody else have any questions? Is there anybody from our public that have a question that they'd like to ask? All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. This has been very helpful. Again, this dialogue is gonna continue. Officially, we're gonna have our town meeting on November 2nd down at Schiller Rec Center, so we encourage everybody to be a part of that as well.
What time is it?
That is at 6 PM, Dee? I think we
6
got that.
PM to
6
8
PM,
PM.
yeah.
Schiller Park Auditorium, and we know it's election day, but we're hoping that will be a draw as well.
So go vote and then go.
Go vote.
Go vote and go talk, yeah.
Right.
So I'll be at that one, and then I think Commander Gardner will be at that one as well, and he is the commander for Zone 2, which is just south of, Marion Village, or the southern part of Marion Village and south.
And let me touch upon something, so at the last meeting it came up, hey, how do officers know, we have a different radio channel for each zone of the city, 5 different zones currently, there really needs to be 6, but there's 5 different zones currently. So the question came up, how do officers know? I mean, if something happens on 13 precinct and they're on this channel, how do they know? Our radio simulcast when there's something that is important that is going on. Additionally, officers can maintain on their computer screen in their cruiser different zones, so they can see different runs. We prioritize all of our runs, and so priority 1 and 2 runs are red, and so they'll see immediately when there's a priority 1 or 2 run. If they're not tied up on another run, I would say criminals do not recognize district or precinct boundaries. In the long run, we shouldn't either, but that's not an overnight solution.
One more thing I wanna say, and Chief Bodker, can you tell us if Ride with a Cop is an option available?
Ride-alongs?
Mhm.
Yes, we're doing ride-alongs.
Okay, so
Yes.
if you haven't ridden in a cop's cruiser and spent 6 hours with someone, you're really missing a life experience. It is so exciting, it's very, very informative, and I will send Chris the information, we'll get it out on Neighbors for Neighbors, how you can sign up to Ride with a Cop.
I think Bill wants to do that.
It is really, really, seeing what they're going through and the number of calls and how things work a little bit is eye-opening. So
Thank you,
I encourage everybody in this room to do that.
thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
Well, thank you,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
for taking the time.
Thanks, Dee.
And thank you